Good evening. Tonight, we're examining the works of one of the most prolific authors in all of fantasy literature, Raymond E. Feist. Before me on this table lies his magnum opus, The Rift Wars Cycle. Holy, and I can't emphasize this enough, crap! It's quite possibly the fourth longest fantasy series of all time. More than 13,000 pages written across 30 volumes over a period of over 30 years. Eat your heart out, Wheel of Time fans. This is the very definition of epic. And I'm still missing 5 of the books in the series here.
Back in 1982, Raymond E. Feist was an aspiring author. He and his friends had come up with an alternative to Dungeons & Dragons, a fantasy setting that they called Midkemia. And these Friday nighters, they went out on all sorts of adventures in this new world. Feist, finding inspiration in this world, decided to write what he had termed a ripping yarn. A sprawling tale covering 12 years in the lives of its protagonists that ultimately would span a war across 2 worlds in a massive and fully realized fantasy universe of humans, elves, dragons, magicians, heroes, and villains. The result was Magician. The book was so long that the publisher originally released it in 2 volumes, Magician Apprentice and Magician Master. Luckily, it was successful enough that Feist was able to republish it later as a single volume. This is ostensibly the story of 2 friends, 2 young lads, one a foundling orphan and the other a young squire. One wishes to become a famous and powerful magician, the other to become a dashing knight who marries an elven queen. Both boys ultimately achieve their desires, but neither in the way they would have imagined, and not without bitter struggle or personal sacrifice. And along the way, their kingdom is plunged into a sudden and unexpected conflict with soldiers from another world as part of a much longer and larger conflict between beings of incredible power and terrible purpose. The lives of these boys and everyone they love are turned upside down, and they're all ultimately embroiled in a struggle with the fate of the universe itself in the balance. The first book is a self-contained story, but it sets the stage for the next 2 books, Silverthorn and A Darkness at Sethanon. And together they form the first trilogy, the first Rift War. These 3 books are classics of modern fantasy, and they should be on every fantasy fan's bookshelf. They were wildly successful, they've been incredibly influential in their own right, but frankly, they're just really fun reads, with engaging plots, great characters, and wonderful and complex world building. While the series went on for another 27 books after A Darkness at Sethanon, ultimately covering several generations, new conflicts and struggles, and countless new characters, turning from a simple ripping yarn into a sprawling epic, there's a period of the story that was largely unexplored. Between A Darkness at Sethanon and the next book, Prince of the Blood, there's a period of at least 15 to 20 years, maybe more. Certainly that's enough time for an adventure or 2. Feist always liked computer games, but he never felt that they could do justice to a complex fantasy story. And he was largely right. Before the Ultima series, very few fantasy games were even attempting to do anything of any real depth, and even fewer succeeded. But John Cutter of Dynamix and his team thought that they could create such a game, using Feist's Midkemia setting. Feist was understandably skeptical. But he listened to them, and over the course of many conversations, his doubts were assuaged and a story began to take shape. And what you're about to see is the result. Betrayal at Krondor. The story wasn't actually written by Feist himself. He was busy at the time writing The King's Buccaneer. But he did have editorial control, and John Cutter and Neil Halford were very careful to write a story that was true to the world of Midkemia and to Feist's writing style. Beyond that, they also wanted to create a good RPG with entertaining gameplay and mechanics, and in my opinion, they were wildly successful. The game went on to become one of the most well-regarded works of computer fantasy, regularly showing up in lists of the best fantasy games, and even of the best computer games overall. It's got a robust skill system, great combat, and a sprawling world, and while the story is necessarily linear, it's engaging, and it takes the player across the world and beyond. It's just really, really good. So good that Feist himself decided that the story was canonical. He included references to events from the games in later books, and he finally wrote his own novelization of the game's events as Krondor the Betrayal, crediting both Cutter and Halford and dedicating the book to them. I first got to play Betrayal at Krondor after its initial release on disc in 1993, and I was instantly hooked. I even bought the re-release when they put it out again on CD. By the way, the CD release has all of the music tracks in CD audio format, so you can listen to them. I've been a fan of the Midkemia universe ever since I read the first book, and I've been in love with this game for over 2 decades, and I'm really, really excited to share it with you. So come along with me on a journey into the world of Midkemia. I think we'll have a really great time. I'll see you all in the next video.